This painting captures a moment of childhood innocence when four sisters are lost in their own worlds, oblivious to the cruel and unforgiving world. They have no idea what fate has in store for them, what challenges and tragedies they will face in their lives. But what is the hidden story behind this painting? What is the dark and sad truth that makes it so heartbreaking? Find out in today's video. The Daughters of Edward Darley Boyd is a large oil painting that measures about 87 by 87 inches. It was painted in 1882 by John Singer Sargent, an American artist who was born in Florence, Italy, and spent most of his life in Europe. Sargent was one of the only most successful and celebrated portrait painters of his time, known for his elegant and flattering depictions of high society figures. First, let's talk about the painting. It might seem completely mundane at first glance, but it is not a typical portrait. It shows four young girls, the daughters of Edward Darley Boyd and Mary Louisa Cushing Boyd, who were friends of Sargent's and a part of the American expeditor community in Paris. The girls are Florence, who was 14-year-old, and when the painting was made, Jane, who was 12, Mary Louisa, who was 8, and Julia, who was 4. They all arranged in a dark and spacious foyer of their family's apartment on the Avenue de Fredland, a luxurious neighborhood favored by wealthy Americans. The unconventional composition and psychological complexity of this painting is astounding. It is an interesting thing to note that the girls are not posed in a formal or symmetrical way, but rather scattered across the canvas, each in their own space and attitude, giving a sense of individuality to each of them. They seem to be unaware of each other's presence or even at the viewer's gaze. They are isolated and detached, as if lost in their own thoughts. The eldest daughter, Florence, stands near the center of the painting, leaning against a table with a vase of flowers. She wears a white pinafore with dark bluish-green lace and an undershirt, standing with both her hands clasped. She looks straight ahead with a certain impassiveness and a confident expression, but her eyes are partly hidden by the shadow. She seems to be the most mature and self-assured of the sisters, but also the most distant and disconnected. Jane, the second eldest, stands next to Florence looking like a deer caught in the headlights. Her mouth is slightly open, and it looks as if she's been caught in the middle of doing something. Considering the fact that she's the middle child, she might feel overshadowed or overlooked at times. Mary Louisa, the third eldest, stands on the left side of the painting, in the front of the wall. You can see a blue and white vase. She's dressed in a white and red pinafore. She has her blonde hair loose over her shoulders, and she looks up at something outside the frame with a curious and attentive expression. She seems to be the most inquisitive of the sisters, always thinking out of the box, but not without a rebellious attitude, something that comes naturally to the middle children according to Adler. Julia, the youngest of the four sisters, sits on a rug on the floor on the right side of the painting, next to another large blue and white Japanese vase. She holds a pink doll in her lap and looks at us with a tender and innocent look. As the youngest child, she might feel excluded. Maybe her sisters think that she's too immature or innocent to join them in everything they do, but she sees to be the most fun-loving and timid of all of them, revealing a bit of vulnerability. One of the most intriguing things about the painting is that of full contrast and contradictions, light and dark, warm and cool colors, and open and closed spaces. The foyer is filled with objects that suggest wealth and culture, paintings, sculptures, furniture, rugs, flowers, and large Japanese vases. But it also feels empty and cold at the same time. There are no signs of life or activity other than these four girls, no windows or doors that lead to other rooms or outside views. The girls are surrounded by beauty and luxury, but there also seem to be very isolated, left to their own account, which is kind of tragic. So, what is the means behind this painting? What is Sargent trying to tell us about these girls and their lives? There are no definitive answers to these questions, but there are certain clues that can help us understand more about the context and the history behind this work. One of these clues is the influence of another famous painting that Sargent admired, Las Meninas by Diego Velázquez, painted in 1656. Las Meninas shows the young Spanish princess Margarita Teresa with her maids-in-waiting in a large room of the royal palace. Like Sargent's painting, it has a square format and a complex composition that plays with perspective, space, light, and reflection. It also has a mysterious and ambiguous mood that invites the viewer to wonder about the relationship between the characters and their situation. Sargent had traveled to Madrid in 1879 to study the copies of the works of Velázquez at the Museo Nacional de Prado. He was impressed by the Spanish master's skill and style, and he incorporated some of his elements into his own paintings. The Daughters of Edward Darley Boyd is one of the most obvious examples of Sargent's homage to Velázquez. The painting may have been deeply inspired by Velázquez's painting, but Sargent also made certain significant changes to create a different effect. He replaced the royal family with an ordinary one, moved the setting from a palace to a small apartment, and he reduced the number of figures from 9 to 4. Furthermore, he eliminated any interaction or communication between the figures in the painting, consequently increasing the sense of direction and distance along with isolation amongst them. He also used a darker and more subdued palette, creating a contrast between the bright and colorful dresses of the girls and the gloomy and monotonous background. Another clue is the biography of the Boyd family and their daughters. Edward Darley Boyd was a Harvard-trained lawyer who turned away from his profession to pursue a career as a painter. His wife, Mary Louisa Crushing Boyd, was a vivacious and social woman who preferred Europe to America. They had 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son, who died in infancy. They lived a cosmopolitan and cultured life, traveling frequently and collecting art and antiques. But their life was not as glamorous or as happy as it seemed. Edward Boyd was not a successful or talented painter, and he struggled with depression and alcoholism. Mary Louisa Boyd suffered from poor health and mental instability, and she became estranged from her husband. The daughters grew up without a stable home or a normal education, and they faced many difficulties and tragedies in their adulthood. But the little girls in this portrait were completely oblivious to what the future had in store for them. An interesting way to look at this painting is through Alfred Adler's personality theory, according to the birth order of the siblings. Adler believed that the birth order had a significant and predictable impact on a children's development and personality. Florence, the eldest, married twice and divorced twice. She had 2 sons, one of which died in World War I, and she suffered from mental illness and spent some time in a sanatorium. She died in 1920 at the age of 52. Jane, the second eldest, married once and had no children. She devoted her life to art and music, becoming a painter and a pianist. She also learned the shadows of being the eldest sister for all her life. Finally decided to follow her dream and pave her own path. She lived in Rome for many years, where she hosted a saloon for many artists and intellectuals, and she died in 1955 at the age of 85. Mary Louisa, the third eldest, married once and had 3 children. She was a writer and a poet, publishing several books of verse. She lived in Boston for most of her life, where she was active in social and charitable causes. She died in 1945 at the age of 71. Julia, the youngest, married once and had 2 children. She was a sculptor and a painter, exhibiting her works in several galleries. She lived in Paris for some time, where she befriended Gertrude Stein and Pablo Picasso. She died in 1969 at the age of 91. Needless to say, these girls had very different personalities and destinies, but they all shared some common traits. They were all independent, creative, adventurous, and unconventional women who pursued their passions and interests despite the challenges they faced. The Daughters of Edward Darley Boyd is a painting that had fascinating generations of viewers with its beauty and mystery. Click on any of the 2 videos on the screen right now for more content.